Good morning, AmyK. It's so nice to see you.
It is so great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
Well, it's just as we like to say, we are not alone if AmyK is in the room.
Here's AmyK. It's in the house. Literally, I'm in
AmyK
the house.
is in the house, and AmyK, I just love your work, and I love the thought of life occurs at one conversation at a time. Tell us what you mean about that.
I really believe this. I've been preaching this for a long time. And I think for leaders, especially, it's the conversations at work, it's the conversations at home. And then, Bill, it's also those conversations when I talk about that me, myself, and I have at 3 o'clock in
Mhm.
the morning,
Oh
or
yeah,
that you have when you're getting ready to make a really big decision, or
oh yeah,
there's an inflection point where you've got to take some action. And so sometimes the toughest conversations are the ones that you have with yourself.
absolutely. I find that one of my favorite books of all time, it's quite old now. It was called Powers of Mind. And Powers of Mind, a wonderful book. And he said one of the key points he made in his book was your mind is not your friend.
It's so true that I think that we get caught up in the regurgitated patterns, the thought processes that we have, the habits that our brain then neurologically constructs. So I'm a brain geek. So I go back to my cognitive science days. But I think one of the things that's fascinating now is we really do talk. There's even a book on this as well, where you're breaking the habit of being yourself, meaning
Right.
you're breaking the habit of your own mental constructs
Hmm.
that might have gotten you here, but aren't going to get you where you need to go. And I don't mean that at all trite. I actually mean that in a very profound way.
And it's absolutely true because it's the way we think that makes all the difference. And I think that for the my group, okay, the CEOs of my group and the challenges they have is having goals and communicating those goals to their key executives, the people that support them. And you have something that I really love called fierce conversations. Tell us what a fierce conversation is like.
Well, fierce conversations is actually the terminology. Let's give credit where credit is due to Susan Scott. And so what I talk about is absolutely how do you navigate them? So how do you show up for a tough conversation? Most of us avoid them. So kind of like if you're a geek and you like the facts like I do, most leaders on average will avoid a tough conversation anywhere from 6 months to 2 years.
Oh my
Now, if
gosh,
you
that
think about
long?
that. That's crazy, right?
That
It's
is crazy because
crazy.
my goodness, whatever you're trying to deal with has changed, a thousandfold.
And here's where it gets even like worse, and the cost is even more so, is what if it doesn't change because you're not having that conversation? I mean,
Exactly.
what if it's the
Exactly.
underperformer?
Yeah.
What if it's the guy or the gal that you've been doing business with on your senior leadership team for 20 years, but now they're kind of imploding, and yet you don't want to have that tough conversation? Or maybe it's a family business, or maybe it's somebody in your family. And so
Exactly.
we talk about then the average cost is somewhere between $7,500 and $10,000. And that's just from the research of doing the tough conversations at work. But what I always talk about, Bill, is what that doesn't include is the emotional cost, the stress, the anxiety, the energy drain, all the thought work and headspace that takes up. And so I I used to say, and then I got a little older, I got a little wiser. I used to
Yeah.
say you have to have a tough conversation like within 3 to 4 days.
Hmm.
And now I put it in context. To me, it is that if you need to prepare, if you need to do some of the due diligence or the legal work or anything like that at work, it
Hmm.
could take maybe 2 weeks,
Oh
right?
yes.
Um, I also talk about timing is everything. So a lot of times I used to preach, and again, we're on our own learning curve, and this is me just being real. We're all learning. I
Oh
used to be
yeah.
like, hey, you have to do this right away. And I've gotten very good now, especially with my coaching clients, of saying timing is everything. So let's
Hmm.
just say you and I have to have a really tough conversation.
Hmm.
But if I know that it's now the end of the day and you're already exhausted, or I'm exhausted, or something's just happened, it's like, that's not the best time.
No, it's
And
not.
again, you don't use it to procrastinate, you use it to be discerning and smart.
Hmm. Amy, tell us about your website. She Gets It. I'm very fascinated by that.
I I had a little bit of a moment in the pandemic where I felt like we were missing connectivity. And by we, women, my friends. And so it started out as this little seed that I planted to have robust conversations. thoughtful conversations in a time when we weren't having connectivity.
Mhm.
And I did it like the classic, right? I wasn't looking to make money. I did it from my heart. I was super fired up and passionate about it. And the next thing I know, people are like, well, we want classes around this and we want training around this. And so now it's a huge chunk of our business, and it
Fabulous.
lights me up every day to do it.
I encourage you to take a look at AmyK's She Gets It, okay? I learned so many things about that, and I'd say this last 5 years, especially and during COVID, the diversity, equity, inclusion, some of the work that you do there for women specifically is just spot on. I really, really find it great value. And I have a company that I'm working with right now that has some issues around, women burnout specifically.
It's
And so
real.
I'm
They're
going
not
to be
alone. It's
sharing that
real.
with
Yeah,
them.
it's and and it isn't. So I grew up in a family of men and
Mhm.
sports and being
Yep.
included. And so I like to make sure that people understand that I'm very fond of all genders. And so to me this wasn't about, oh, I'm going to separate it because
Right.
women need it. It's
Exactly. Carve it out just for women. It could be for anyone.
That's right. And so diversity, equity, inclusion means all voices matter. And
Yeah.
that's all. And I mean that sincerely. And so part of what I love, and it's a blessing, and I realize it's a blessing, is I was raised in a really thoughtful, progressive family. My dad included me before Title IX, before I was
Wow.
even really allowed to play. My dad was like, well, you're going to keep score, So we're a huge basketball, huge sports family. And I think
Mhm.
that what I learned early on is that every single person has a significantly meaningful role to play.
Absolutely.
And so over the years, you do those classic scenarios where like ops and sales, why can't you get along, right? Or somebody will come in like, this company wouldn't exist without me. Like we've never heard that, right?
No, right. Exactly.
What I love to just do, and She Gets It is just another platform. And I speak to men and women all over the world, but it's saying, okay, how do we get people engaged? How do we make them feel significant? How do we let them know that their voice matters? And so just sharing all those tools over the years has just been super rewarding.
How do we get in touch with you, AmyK? Tell us your website.
Oh, super easy. So you can go to shegetsit.com and reach us through there, or you can go to AmyK, which is AmYK, just those four letters.
AmyK,
AmyK, my first name.com, and you can get us there as well.
AmyK.com. Make sure you check that out. Now, AmyK, you were also a Vistage member, were you not?
I was for years.
Okay, tell us about that.
So I joke, some days I bleed teal. I'm such a huge fan of Vistage. And I'll be really sincere when I say this, and you'll realize why. I was a speaker for 22 years. I'm still a speaker for their executive summits, and I did over 2,600 group presentations.
Oh my goodness.
And yeah, I love Vistage. I believe in it. And what I found the most valuable as a member was the executive session. And the reason that that I say that sincerely is because I was a speaker, right? And
Oh
the
yeah.
speakers are nice to have. They're a total bonus. But when you sit down, Bill, I think what I loved the most was sitting down with whether it's 10, 12, 17 other
Right.
brilliant brains.
Yep.
And we're focused on somebody in the hot seat. So whether it was a challenge or an opportunity, you've got this breadth of perspective. You're
Oh yeah.
harnessing all this collective intelligence to say, how do we move you forward? And so whether I was in the hot seat or somebody else was in the hot seat, it was invaluable learning.
And the key thing in Harvard Business Review echoes exactly what you just said, AmyK, is the power of peers. Okay. And collectively, we know so much more than the individual does. And as I like to say to my group, when we got an all-day executive session coming up, Amy, on April 19th, and in that meeting, we're going to say, bring us your failures. Okay.
Yeah.
It's not about what you've got. What do you not know? What do you need to know? And how can we help you? And I tell you, it's really inspirational. And oftentimes we find, AmyK, as well, that what they say is the issue really isn't
Isn't
the
it?
issue.
Almost never is. And I
I know
love that.
it's the symptom. And then as we drill down, as we
Yeah.
say, get deeper into that iceberg under the water, what are you really saying and what is really happening here? So, and one of the things I really value in your work, and I've shared with my group, is those messages, how you say things. And I think you've got like 18 to about 20 of them. Tell us a little bit about those.
So I joke, I'm like the queen of magical phrases, mainly because I wished I'd had them earlier in my life. So
Indeed.
usually it's that, it's that 5 hours later, you're swirling your cocktail and you're like, oh, now I know what I'm
Now I
going to say.
remember. I should have said that.
Exactly. Note to self. But so let's go back. We'll combine a couple things. So
Okay.
in the executive session of a Vistage meeting, you're solving problems, right? It's
Right.
like, and you just said, it's never what you're actually talking about on the surface. So it's that typical sales are down. Sales are down is a cause of something else, right? And so after 30 years of doing sales training, like the minute somebody says sales are down, I'm like, okay, here we go. And the magical phrase that you would typically walk into that scenario is a how might we? How might we actually uncover what's really going on? And what I love about a how might we magical phrase, and that's like one of hundreds that I have, is we don't have to figure it out in this moment. We're going to reduce the stress. How might we move this forward? How might we actually grow by 12%? How might we resolve this? Opens up and expands the thinking. And then to go a little bit further, there's an implication question. Another great magical phrase is what happens when? And then fill in the blank again. And so what you're allowing people to do is paint scenarios that they're either curious about or that they want to avoid. So like what happens when we lose our largest, account? What happens when we don't solve this problem? Like what happens when? It's just an implication, and you're going to paint the unintended consequences that we all want to avoid. Or we can get curious, like what happens when we combine these, right? So now we're exploring. What I love about a magical phrase is that rather than scripting, don't believe in scripting, it puts guardrails around a conversation. So it can reduce the tone, it can reduce the tension when you do a certain tone and tenor. So for instance, one of my favorite ones is somebody's venting, somebody's upset, somebody's communicating sensitive emotions.
Often happens, as we know.
Never, right? Never. Instead of trying to solve it or fix it, one of the very best things that you can do is slow down and say, so Bill, what do you need most from me right now?
I love that. That is so important because what happens is that, and the way you express these things, AmyK, is that it opens up me not as a subject or as like maybe it's my fault or I become defensive. It's inclusive. You're
Yes.
bringing me in. What do you think? How can you help? I love that. It's so important.
Well,
Yeah.
even to me, even tough love
Yeah.
is love. And
Yeah.
so what you have to do first is communicate to connect. Like you can have boundaries, you can be firm, you can draw a line in the sand, but I want you to connect first.
Exactly.
And so I spent years ago, and I'm going back to the 20s, but years ago I lived in Shanghai, China for 3 years. And one of the concepts that I learned there culturally was something called soft front, hard spine, or soft front, hard back.
Tell us about that. It's fascinating.
It's about connecting. So a lot of us as leaders, we'll go in and we'll be all blustery and we'll be like, I'm gonna fix this, or this is
taking charge
unacceptable.
here,
And everybody shuts down. But if you can connect first and then have your boundary, if you can connect first and then be firm, then you're actually going to allow somebody to be like, oh, Bill's not completely upset with me, but there are standards and expectations. And of course, you don't want to be too soft. I don't mean about it being like, squishy.
Yeah.
But the idea is if I communicate to connect first, and I'm also really firm in my standards, my expectations, objectives, whatever it is you're talking about, you get more respect. You get more buy-in.
You know what, AmyK, you are a wonderful person. I really love all the things you have to say. To the people who watch this video, go to amyk.com or go to She Gets It, and you will not be alone if you're with AmyK. I will tell you that.
Oh, thanks so much. Really, truly, Bill, it's a total privilege from my heart to yours. Hugs.
Likewise, ma'am. Thanks so very much.